coming weeks. We're counting down to that bat mitzvah. We're looking forward, Sophie. That said, here we are on that Pesach Shabbat conflation, as I mentioned earlier this morning, and we talked a little bit about last night, that we've been looking and discussing that Passover, or at least the Seder in our whole week, occurs in real time. That is, as I mentioned last night, Seder night is the death of the firstborn, that 10th plague. And here we are, as Rabbi Davis mentioned, and as we chanted and we referred to with Shirat Hayam, we're crossing the waters this morning. And the question occurred to me earlier this week, then why not end the Seder with, instead of next year in Jerusalem, with next week at the Red Sea? If this is really about a real-time observance, why not explicitly engage in that? Because first we know that when we end the Seder with L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, we don't mean a physical Jerusalem. And as my father reminds our family every year at the Seder, we talk about this Jerusalem state of mind, that at least midrashically, Yerushalayim is divided into two parts. We have the Yirah, the awe, the reverence, and the Shalem, the peace, the wholeness. And we know, of course, it's lovely, a lovely thought to conclude the Seder with this kavanah, with this intention that we each next year have a sense of contentment balanced with reverence. And we can leave it at that. That simply at the end of the Seder, we have this wish that next year will be a little bit more rested, a little bit more settled, a little bit more respectful. But there has to be something, at least in my mind, much deeper, much more than that. Last week, on the beginning of Pesach, I talked about the connection of the Seder with Ushpizin and Sukkot. But I actually think that there is another connection based on the words of the Seder. Because when we reflect on L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, even though perhaps it's most famous in our familial memory to our observance of Seder, we know that it's also the way that we close Yom Kippur at the end of Ne'ilah. And perhaps on the surface, maybe then Ne'ilah is the end of Tshuva, right? That's what we often talk. We say Ne'ilah, the closing of the gates, the locking of the gates, that's when Tshuva ends. Well, the rabbis say, no, actually, it's not about the Aseret Yemei Tshuva leading up. It's not just Ne'ilah, but we have till Hoshana Rabbah. And the Hasidim say, well, you don't only have till Hoshana Rabbah because Sukkot is a reprise of Hanukkah, so you actually have to the end of Hanukkah. But maybe if the idea is Tshuva is perpetual, maybe we have through Pesach, we have through the end of Seder, and we can stop there, say, oh, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, that's a reference to the still time for Tshuva, and that's the connection. But I think that that's, again, not simply enough. Then maybe L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim is a code phrase, a trigger phrase. It's not only meant for us to think about the liturgy of Yom Kippur and Ne'ilah, and it's not only meant for us to think about the idea of doing teshuvah in this last minute, but if we think about Yom Kippur, then we could start to think about Seder. Why? Yom Kippur is meant to be a near-death experience. Now, I don't want to make a joke about sitting in shul and feeling like you're dying waiting for services to end and finally getting a chance to eat. But this idea of a near-death experience, we say it. Kavakarat ro'eh edro mavir tzonot tachat shivto. We pass before God like sheep to a potential slaughter. We don't think about that image in our minds. We're sitting in the Drash service or the Ivri service or the classic service. We don't think about that image, but when Cantor Abrams and the choir chant this, it's beautiful melody, but we're the kind of sheep going off, and God is giving the thumbs up and the thumbs down. It's a terrible, terrifying image. And God willing, we survive to face a new day. And that day after Yom Kippur, we are rebirthed. We are born again. The concept of being born again in Christianity comes from our vision of the day after Yom Kippur. And the same, frankly, is true on Pesach, that we gather for this Leil Shimurim, this night of vigil, this watchmanship, not necessarily for bad guys looking to attack us, but for a hope that our family will survive that death of the firstborn. Just like the Israelites hopefully put the swath of blood on their mantles and their doorposts, hoping that they would be protected. The connection is not only near death, it's not only teshuvah, it's the idea of rebirth, that we come out of it on the other side with this new lease on life. L'shana haba, it really means next year, as I approach this near-death experience, I will approach it with awe and with peace. And it's a challenge to each of us then, if we're going to approach that near-death experience with that reverence and that contentment, that we have to live our life each day to the fullest, without regrets, tying up loose ends regularly and committing ourselves to a life of regular and continuous tshuva. So to begin closing, we have to ask ourselves then, what is the nuance? Judaism teaches us that there are three relationships. Many of you have heard me teach this before. There's ben adam la'atzmo, between a person and themselves, ben adam la'makom, between a person and God, and ben adam la'chavero, between a person and their neighbor. We know that Yom Kippur is about working on the relationship with God. Yom Kippur is only about ben adam la'makom. Pesach then is ben adam la'chavero, working on our relationships with our fellow human beings. So our charge this morning, as we cross the Red Sea, is to take those oppressed through the waters with us and join together in the dry shore of a new day, so that we can figure out how to start working on ourselves. Chag Sameach.